Hello, everyone's Forest Focus. Nottingham Forest push to make at least 2 additions to the squad in the coming days. We'll discuss the reported bid of around 30 million for Bologna winger Dan Ndoye, as well as Manchester City's demands on James Mcatee. And of course, we'll talk about Morgan Gibbs-White. So joining to discuss all that and more, first of all, is Michael Temple. Temps, how are you?
Good. Apologies for the lateness. Totally my fault trying to log on to public Wi-Fi. Fletcher's been to 12 Oasis concerts and heavyweight boxing and has still made it on time, looking resplendent. So admin errors are on me today.
Yeah, he's looking very fresh, is Fletch. Darren Fletcher, how are you today?
Oh, very good, very good. And it's very gracious of Temps to admit it. He's the reason why it's 8 minutes past 1 and not 1 o'clock.
I mean, that's on time for us anyway, so yeah. It's fine. It's pretty par for the course, certainly. Right, like I say, we'll talk about those players. We'll get into Dan Ndoye first. But first, kicking us off, we've discussed all this a lot. We haven't heard from Fletch from a while. What's your take, to set the table, Fletch, on where we're at as a club at the moment when you take into account the Gibbs-White situation, the potential incomings, and everything in general? How are you feeling about
it? I think the last time I was on, I was at pains to say that maintaining the squad that they've got would be seen as success in this transfer window. I know that it feels like the summer where they've got to try and go again. But keeping the talented players was always going to be important. Anthony Elanga gone, Morgan Gibbs-White, you'd presume the departure would be imminent. It's very difficult to put the brakes on a situation like this once it starts to roll. There's still a long time to go. And the players that they're being linked with, I know we're going to talk about James Mcatee, we're going to talk about Dan Ndoye, we may talk about others as well. Jacob Ramsey in particular. I mean, they're all players that are going to make this squad stronger than it is right now. So they're good players. They're potentially impactful players. They're also players that could potentially improve their value, which is obviously the way that the club has decided to go. I just think that this summer really comes with a bit of a warning, and it's something that Brighton heed very well. It's something that Brentford are now going to have to deal with, but they've been good at responding to it. Crystal Palace as well, that when you're a successful club, you've got talented players. Clubs are going to come in and sign them. Players are going to want to go and play in the Champions League. And it's an inevitability that linked with success, there is more significant interest in the players in your squad. I think what people will have learned is that they have to be decisive and they have to be ready for when these situations occur, because it won't be long until Murillo is the apple of somebody's eye. Elliot Anderson is the apple of somebody's eye. And the important thing is being able to be in a position to say, okay, what's the maximum value? As a business, that's what we're prepared to accept. And then as a consequence of that, this is the route that we're going to go down, because we've scouted everybody. We've got the list. We know which way we're going to go. And I think that is going to have to be the policy for future summers and future windows, because they've been successful at recruiting players and making them better. So on the back of that, you're then going to have to sell a few. And that's the way that this is going to go. So I think how decisive Forest are in replacing Elanga and potentially replacing Gibbs-White will tell us a lot about what this journey will ultimately look like.
Let's talk a bit about Dan Ndoye then. And as Fletch says, we will mention Jacob Ramsey. We'll do a little bit on Sancho because he's been linked. Obviously, we'll do Mcatee. But starting primarily with Ndoye, lots of reports, Temps, that we've bid around 30 million for him. Don't know how much chance you've had to see of him. But what's your thoughts on him potentially replacing Elanga?
High quality player, like the look of him. While he'll replace Elanga's role in the team, he's a slightly different style of winger. Don't think he gets the byline quite as much, maybe a little bit more direct, comes alive in the box and has slightly more utility value. I think he's a more natural striker than Anthony Elanga, but doesn't profile just as a chalk on your boots winger, which might be useful. I think we will still play slightly different versions of our shape against bigger teams away from home to that which we deploy at the City ground. Looks like a real high quality target, and I think one that would be welcomed by all. Inevitably is going to be compared to Anthony Elanga if we get him in after his first few games, but I think we should just be mindful that he plays a slightly different version, but he can fit into our team. He can add real quality, and I think he's being recruited to be in the starting 11. There's no question about that. It's a signing which I would support, but I don't expect him to be a like-for-like replacement.
He did go off injured at the weekend for Bologna, but he's posted on his Instagram it was nothing serious, and I think it was a pre-season thing. Napoli seem to be interested but not bid for him, so that's probably where we're at. You've seen him in action, Fletch. What's your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I was at the Euros last summer and I saw him play for the Swiss team, and I must say I was quite impressed. He probably carried the biggest threat in the Swiss team in the games that I saw him in. I think I saw Switzerland 3 times, so it was a decent sample size for a tournament, and he looked like a player that as Temp says, comes alive in the final third, which is what you want a winger to do. And he looked like the kind of player that was going to make things happen for you, which is obviously important. Comes with a caveat. That was in an international game in the Euros. The sample size we've got is playing in Serie A for a Bologna team who weren't as good last season as they were the season before. So it's difficult. We don't know whether he's going to adapt quickly to the Premier League, and we don't know whether the game's going to transfer. But certainly on the raw materials that he's got, you give him a fair chance of being a success. My question would be that Ramon Sosa has gone. Anthony Elanga has gone. Is Jota Silva still at the club, or has he gone yet?
No, he's still here, but there's lots of talk that he's going. He did play on Saturday against Monaco.
So if he leaves as well, that would be 3 wide players departing. At the minute, the club are being linked with Dan Ndoye. There was a theory towards the back end of last season that Nuno would like an additional wide player anyway. So you would suspect that he would be the first of a number of wide attacking players that Forest would need to recruit. So the only slight concern I'd have is that everybody's talking about Ndoye, but they might not just need quality, but they might need quantity as well as quality. So it could be quite a fluid situation for those wide positions for the rest of this summer transfer window. Otherwise, they're going to find themselves lacking the numbers and, what did we say a lot last season, impactful players to come onto the pitch off the bench and make a difference. So I think this is probably the most significant area of the team that they've got to work on.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's probably the most significant signing, although Morgan's situation impacts that. There's over 500 people with us already, which is great. So do us a favour and hit like if you haven't already. The other wingers we're linked with, Temps, aren't even really, I don't think they're necessarily wingers. Mcatee, according to The Athletic, they see him as an 8 or a 10. I'll ask you the same question. City would probably want 35 million for him. Is that too steep, Temps, or are you on board?
It's the going rate in the context of recent transfers, and also in the context of the pile of cash that's currently burning a hole in our pockets. No Premier League team is going to do us any favours in terms of the cost of recruitment. And there's a lot of business to be done. I think too, I mentioned this on the text over the weekend, there's a lot of players going to become available at the back end of this window. It's not quite emerging yet, but there are going to be some high profile omissions from Premier League 25s. There are going to be some high profile players at Man United, at Chelsea, at Spurs, who are going to be surplus requirements and perhaps not find a home too early in the window. And as we work down our lists, there are going to be other players who have quite lofty expectations to the quality of their move. And I'd put the likes of Garnacho, one or two others in this bracket, who are going to have to consider the likes of Forest as their destination. So I like that we're going on the front foot, and we talk about players like Mcatee, like Harvey Elliott, like Wissa, one or two others. Some of them may come off, some of them won't, but at the same time, other players will become available. He's a striker, but a name I'd throw at you is Nicholas Jackson. Is he going to be happy with the manner in which his situation has changed at Chelsea with João Pedro and Liam Delap coming to the fore? I think there are notable examples of that around the Premier League. So like the fact that we're chasing James Mcatee, but this is a unique window for Forest. In so much as we've been adept at finding bargains from other markets, we're replacing high-profile, proven quality Premier League game breakers. That doesn't come cheap. So no surprise to me that someone with the ability and potential of James Mcatee is going to command circa 35 million.
I will come back to Mcatee. What do you think about that point, Fletch, around waiting and potentially getting, bargains or fringe players that we might otherwise miss out on versus panicking late in the window? Where's the balance lie for you there?
I think I'd like a more proactive approach. And then if you can find a gem at the back of the window that just gives you a little bit more than you anticipated you'd have, that late signing or two that you didn't think you were going to get, then it's a bonus. But I think you've got to follow a certain method, the kind of plan that you've got in place, and be as decisive as you can be to get the players in, because the longer they can work with the manager in pre-season, the better chance you've got of starting the season quickly. It's very difficult when a player comes in right at the back end of the window, the season started, then they've got to fit in. You might not see the best of that player until November. By then you can make a bad start and you're chasing it. And you look at the Forest fixtures at the start of the season, there's no real reason why they can't get off to a good start. So that feels important to me if they're going to try and build on what they did last season. So I'd like them to be decisive. I'd like to see them get the business done, get everybody in, because we know that this is not just about acquiring talented footballers. There's a method to the way Nuno does it at Forest. There's a system, the way the team plays. There's a real togetherness within the group, and you can't just put somebody in on a Wednesday and by Thursday they've got all that down. That takes a while. So I think for the way that this team operates, the way that the club operates, having people together for as long as they can in the preparation stage would be important. The Mcatee thing's interesting because while I'm not saying he's going to be Cole Palmer, there was a situation where Cole Palmer wasn't getting in the Manchester City team, and the money that Chelsea paid seemed a little bit steep at the time. Now, if you sign Mcatee for 30 million and he turns out to be a replacement for Morgan Gibbs-White, then just by doing the maths, Morgan Gibbs-White is at least a £60 million footballer right now. So if he gets anywhere near that level, then there's a lot of upside in the fee. I don't think there can be, if they believe in Mcatee, then I don't think that that's an unreasonable amount of money to pay for one of the players who's going to be your creative spark. He's a potential England international of the future. He already stars for the under-21s. He's from a brilliant situation at Manchester City where he's had a fantastic football education around some of the best players in the world under the best manager on the planet. So if you started to tick boxes, you would suggest that a lot of them should be ticked at this point. While I look at it and can see the argument that he's not played in the Premier League an awful lot, so it seems a lot of money because you're taking a chance. You're also taking a chance on a player that comes from a situation where he's got more chance to succeed than fail. So I'm not too concerned about that. If they genuinely believe in James Mcatee's ability and they think that he can fill a void potentially vacated by Morgan Gibbs-White, then I would say bite the bullet, do the deal, get him in, and then work to make the best of him, because he's clearly a player with a lot of potential and a lot of ability.
Yeah, I'm not sure the fee. I think it's media stuff. I mean, Matt D here makes a good point. He's only got a year left in his contract. We don't know about if they've got an option. So the fee's what the fee is, I guess. Lewis,
all I'd say, Matt, and you see this a lot. Oh, he's only got a year left on his contract. That's okay if it's Real Madrid who wants to sign him.
Yeah,
because that player will only then want to go to Real Madrid, so the player will happily run the contract down. But somebody will look at that other than Forest and say, well, I'll pay 35 million, even though he's got a year left, because I want the player.
Yeah, Everton are in the race as well. So,
when you've got a market for a player and there are more clubs in, it's very difficult to keep the price down because it becomes a seller's market. So in his case, you're buying a young player, a lot of potential from Manchester City, and there are a handful of Premier League clubs and European clubs that would like to buy him. So the length of contract, I think, will go out of the window a little bit in this regard, because everybody's going to want to pay a little bit more than everybody else to make sure they get the player.
Lewis had some skepticism on him, Temps, around, I don't know if either of you saw it, players who've been in City's academy, whether they can come out and fit straight into a team who plays differently like us. I suppose my only counterpoint to it was he had that year in the dirt at Sheffield United, so he knows what it's like to play a different style, and obviously Forest are more successful. Is this the kind of player that we should be going for? Because we're missing out on a lot. Fans are quite divided on him, but is the principle right of going for a player of Mcatee's age and profile? Is that the kind of way we should be building, do you think?
Well, proven Premier League players cost even more, and they're even more difficult to extract. We signed Morgan Gibbs-White off the back of a championship season. We signed Murillo after a handful of appearances in Brazil. So I don't think we're going to be in the market for match-hardened Premier League players unless there's a Brentford type situation where a project feels like it's coming to a bit of an end, or at least a change in direction, and there's a bit of an exodus on their hands of a want-away player. It's different for those players that come out of top 6 academies, are proven and would have had far more game time in another environment, and have a decision to make. Are they happy being bit part players, or do they want to go and be big dogs at slightly smaller teams? That's a decision that Anthony Elanga made 2 years ago, and he's used it to motivate himself to get back into a Champions League squad and kick on from a personal sense his ability to compete for trophies in a project that's really attractive. So no, I don't feel too concerned. Beyond how they do in the Premier League, there are metrics and ways of assessing these players to understand how they might fit into our system. And I'm sure we're well researched on Mcatee. And I think whichever club ends up giving him game time will reap some benefits. They'll see a growth in that player, as we did in Elanga and Gibbs-White last season, when he becomes the man, when he's guaranteed his starting place and able to be regularly in and around the same group of players who can help him to shine.
I think the thing is, you asked the question, if you're coming in to replace Morgan Gibbs-White, then you've got to be a creative influence. There's certain aspects to your game that you need. If anybody watched him in the summer at the Euros, then he was a very creative influence for England. When you've seen him, it's a difficult team to get into, but when he's been on the pitch for Manchester City, he's not looked out of place. And I think if you're going to make a comparison, when we're talking about fees, would Hutchinson at Ipswich not be a fair comparison? And you look at the fee that Brentford are going to have to potentially pay for him. Well, I would say there's a lot of similarities. Maybe Hutchinson's got slightly more Premier League experience, but maybe Mcatee has a slightly bigger reputation. Both of them England under-21 internationals, both creative young forward players. But I think the price for Hutchinson will be more prohibitive than it is for Mcatee at Manchester City. So that might actually be to Forest's advantage if they choose to go down that route.
Yeah. I'm quite keen for us to sign Hutchinson. I was hoping we get in on that, but it looks
well,
like
that's a lot of money if you think about it. That's a lot of money. That's a bigger fee. So I think that brings a bigger risk than Mcatee.
I like them both. I think they're both good players. And
You're getting greedy now.
Yeah, we've got money to burn, so we'll get on to that. We'll talk about Morgan in a minute, and we'll probably have a similar conversation about Jacob Ramsey. But just before we do, our live show is on Friday. Still tickets available, gigantic.com for a £5, so check that out if you haven't already. Also at the NAV this week, the Lions tour, next test is on Saturday, and tomorrow night, England women versus Italy in the Euros. They're showing that as well, so you can get down and watch that at the NAV. And thanks as ever for their support. Let's talk about Ramsey then. It's probably the same conversation around the fee and things like that. But as a player, Fletch, we've seen quite a lot of him, and he's probably got more experience. What's your take on Ramsey as a player and where he fits into Forest?
I'd be really excited if Forest got Jacob Ramsey. I like him a lot. I think he's a really good player. I very rarely see him have an off day. I think that the ceiling is enormous for him, but I think the floor is very high. I think he's a very good all-round midfield player. Came through a really good system at Aston Villa. I spoke to Steven Gerrard about him when he was the Villa manager, and Steven thought he was fantastic. Steven's a really good judge of a midfield player and should be, based on the career that he had. And he only had positive things to say about Jacob Ramsey. Feels to me a little bit like he's a bit of a square peg in a round hole at Aston Villa, but I don't necessarily think that that's an indictment on him. I think it's just a case of if they've got 4 and he's number 5, it's just difficult to get him in. But when he does play, he plays well for them, scores a goal, gets forward, works hard, a lot of ability. I think Jacob Ramsey's a player that can be an England player. I think he'd make the Forest midfield better. I think his best years are ahead of him. And I think if Forest now are in the market to sign that kind of player, that's a really strong statement about where the club is. I think if you can go into the market this summer and sign a Jacob Ramsey, then that's really big without having Champions League football. Because you'd think, well, a Champions League club, yeah, of course they'll go and get a Jacob Ramsey. But if Forest can pull that deal off at either a Conference League or a Europa League club and they get a player like him, I think that's a really big statement.
Jared in the chat points out he's sort of a similar style player to Anderson. I can see that, like, left wing essentially plays a different role. Before we get into the roles and things, we've got a question about that. What do you think about him, Temps? And around the fee, it's reported to be 50 million, and again, it could be anything. But thoughts on Ramsey in general?
Well, he's just got a reference from Steven Gerrard, so it matters little what I think of him. But yeah, proven quality. I think my only question mark
is Steven Gerrard available to come on this podcast? Because I'll get him on if he is.
By proxy, via Fletcher's WhatsApp, he is. Yeah, absolutely. We've got access to the entire TNT Sports talent team. Yeah, be a great acquisition. My only question marks about the injury record. I think there's been notable periods of time when he's been unavailable, and carrying a relatively small squad as Nuno does. We have to be mindful of that. But look, that may be a quirk and not related to anything chronic. And if we can put that aside, what he can do with football is unbelievable. And I think he adds a lot of depth and breadth to the kind of roles that he can play. And I'd celebrate that signing.
Oh, talking to TNT Sports and the talent pool, we spoke to Adam Summerton on Friday night about Dan Ndoye because he does Serie A. So check that out if you want some more insight on Ndoye from Adam. That was really good. There were 2 comments about you, Temps, and one was praising Restaurant 6 and saying how good it was, which was a freebie, and the other one was from saying that you look like you're waiting for a strip search in customs. So do you want to confirm that's not the case before we move on?
They found nothing. I'll be back in the UK in 20 minutes.
Let me tell you, Temps is the kind of fella that walks through an airport and tells people he's got things hidden on his body just so he gets into that room.
Back to football swiftly. The other thing I was going to ask about the signings that we're linked with, and obviously we haven't got them, but they're different kinds of players. Like we've been discussing how Mcatee and Ramsey play slightly differently off the wings, that kind of thing. Do you think, Fletch, and we don't really know the answer to this, are we going to play a different way next season? Are we going to have to play a different way?
I think we'd have to wait and see. I mean, far be it from me to try and second guess what Nuno would or wouldn't do. And I think you've got to be careful in the modern age. And we all do this. That we kind of pigeonhole players. Well, he plays there and he does that. I mean, I see just in the squad at the moment, if you think about Elliot Anderson, I think Elliot Anderson could play as a 6, an 8, or a 10. And if you needed to, he could play wide as well because he did that for Newcastle. Jacob Ramsey can quite happily play in the centre of the pitch as an orthodox midfield player, and he can drift wide. So you're bringing players in. They're so talented that they can play multiple positions, that you're not just saying, well, he has to play there. So if we sign him, the team has to look like this. I think what they would like to do is be in a position to be able to do different things. I think last season they were very rigid in what they did. It was very difficult to change from one shape to another. They could change from a back 4 to a back 3, which they did successfully in the first half of the season to preserve leads. But it was very difficult to say, how do they get an extra forward player onto the pitch? So now they've brought in Igor Jesus, who could play in a slightly withdrawn role. He could play in a slightly wider role, and he can play through the middle. So straight away, that gives Nuno the option to play with 2 up top, 3 up top, maybe play with a withdrawn striker almost in a 10. So straight away, the players that they're signing would indicate that there'll be more flexibility in the way they can play just based on the recruitment.
Just interjecting quickly, there's a report online just saying Forest's opening bid has been rejected for Ndoye. So we'll monitor that as we go along, but obviously Forest are keen on him. And we saw with Elanga, the first bid doesn't always get accepted.
Matt, just one thing I wanted to say about these kind of profile of players that haven't played loads of Premier League games. The fan base, me included, celebrated the signings of Jesse Lingard and James Ward-Prowse far more than we did Ola Reiner, Elliot Anderson, because of that familiarity and what they used to be. And I think we've all become educated now to see that there is this class of talent at 22, 23 that just hasn't had the right opportunity. Elanga's probably in this pot as well. But given that opportunity, can go on to become a far better player and cruise through the gears pretty quickly. And there are loads of examples of this in Forest's best 11 at the minute, who've just improved so much off the back of that. And that's the attraction of our club. If you're at that level and you're going to back your ability in a top half Premier League team that's going to give you an opportunity, this is the right ride for you. And I hope that appeals to this tranche of players, irrespective of the departure of Anthony Elanga, irrespective to the pending departure of Morgan Gibbs-White. This is a place where 22, 23-year-old players who are talented can get the opportunity to shine and kick on. And we can all benefit from that. And I hope that's not lost on the players that might be considering a move to Forest.
Do you know what, James? I think that's a really valuable point that you've made. And I know that when you're the fan of a club, your club is the biggest club in the world, right? It might be Real Madrid, but in your world, it's that club. And you can't ever see why a player would want to go and play somewhere else because you're so passionate about that shirt and the badge. But there's nothing wrong in the modern game by being that club that players identify and say, listen, if I go and do 2 or 3 years there, that then gets me the move to the next one. Because then you've got agents saying, will you take our player? Because we know how good you are for him, which is a brilliant position to be in. Brighton are the masters at it. players know that if they go and play for Brighton, the next move is Chelsea or Liverpool or whatever it is. So they're saying, well, I'll happily go and play there because I know that that's my ticket to superstardom and mega wealth down the line because I'm going to get the big move. If Forest can become one of those clubs, and there's no reason why they can't, then that makes these summers significantly easier for the recruitment team because there's going to be a mutual wish for these people to come and play in that club. And I think it's a fantastic point you make, Temps, and I really hope you're right because I think that's the sweet spot. Where Forest are right now, that's absolutely the sweet spot. If they can, I think now the challenge for the club, if I know there's a lot of people saying, well, can they get in the Champions League this year? I think if Forest could become Brighton, first and foremost, and never finish below 8th, and have a steady succession of really talented players coming in, playing decent football, and being really good at recruiting and giving you the stars of tomorrow, and everybody turns up and enjoys it, and you get European football, and you've got a chance to win a trophy, and you're operating in games where when you've got a home game or an away game, you think you can win it. I think that's where they are right now. And I think that's going to be the focus. I think if you start to shoot for the moon at this stage, it can be difficult. But if they realize where they are and adopt that sweet spot for them and approach that in a really positive way, then it's possibly easy to take the next step off the back of that. I think the point you make, Temps, I couldn't agree more with that.
Yeah, if you sign for Brighton, you're basically signing an 8-year contract with Chelsea in the background, so it is a good system for them, certainly. Let's talk very briefly about a slightly different kind of player then that's been mentioned. I don't know how much there is in it, but he was the talk of Forest Twitter on Saturday, so I'll ask you quickly about him. Just what's your take on Jadon Sancho, Fletch, who was linked with us? We've had the Rashford discussion. Is it the same conversation or is it slightly different?
It has to be pie in the sky. The kid's on 350,000 quid a week. How does that work? Just do the maths. And again, I said with Rashford the other week, and if Rashford signs for Barcelona today, good luck to him because Barcelona's front three, when he picks his best team, will be Lamine Yamal on one side, Rafinha on the other, and Robert Lewandowski through the middle. And anything they get from Rashford this year is an absolute bonus. So they can carry him because they've got arguably the best front three in Europe without him. So Rashford can go in that dressing room. If he hits a purple patch, Barcelona benefit. But if he doesn't, it does them no damage because they can afford the wages and they're just fine, thank you, in those wide attacking positions. The worry for me, again, is if you bring a Jadon Sancho in and he works, everybody looks like a genius. But if he doesn't, what impact does it have on everything that you're doing? Because he has to be the highest paid player at the club because he's on such a good whack at Man United. And is there a genuine belief that you're going to get consistent performances week after week from Jadon Sancho? Is it worth? Does the risk outweigh the reward, or does the reward outweigh the risk? And I think it's a dangerous move. I mean, he didn't do a great deal at Chelsea, did he, last season? So
no.
I look, I could be wrong, but it wouldn't be one that I would be excited about. I think I'd be nervous rather than excited. It's Lingard written all over it.
Well, we spoke about it on Saturday, and I outlined a lot of red flags. And I made a case for him, but there was too many red flags for me. I mean, even as Sci-Fi Monkey says here, you'd have to play for a third of the money. Yeah, there's no player's going to do that.
By the way, if you're playing for a third of the money, you're still on 115 grand a week. So I don't think there'd be too many in the changing room right now earning that. So again, you're coming in on a third of the cash, and you're still pretty much top dog in there, and you may or may not deliver. And I always think, the player, the thing with Sancho is nothing wrong with the talent. I mean, he's got talent in abundance. He should be a superstar in the Premier League. But it's whether the application is there. And I look at players and I think if you couldn't apply yourself at Manchester United and then you couldn't really apply yourself at Chelsea, are you really going to apply yourself at Forest? I mean, the only real high points we've got for Sancho was at Dortmund. Everybody seems to play well at Dortmund. But since he's been in the Premier League, I mean, you can count the big performances on one hand, pretty much. I think there's just far too much risk involved in that.
Go on, Tams. What do you think?
We're not going to sign Jadon Sancho. I think the member of the Man United bomb squad I'd place the premium on is Garnacho. I think he's at a stage of his career where he needs that move before the move. Jadon Sancho is being over-promoted a little bit quickly. He's been a victim of being in a toxic environment at Man United at a time when they've been plumbing the depths. They signed him for £73 million, immediately put him under a lot of pressure, and it hasn't come off. He's 25 years old, and as Fletch said, his talent is such that if he found himself at Spurs or Villa or Newcastle at this point in time, he'd be celebrated as a really good Premier League footballer. But he's been slightly over-promoted, slightly overpaid, and now he finds himself trapped in a contractual situation that's no good for anybody, and he needs to move. I don't see him coming to Forest. He doesn't profile with our recruitment. He would destabilise the wage structure and potentially the dressing room because of that, not detract him from his character or his talent, but his circumstances mean he's never going to move to Forest.
Yeah, I think so. Let's move on and talk about Morgan then quickly before we go into another break. I think you've had your say on attempts. Maybe you haven't, but he's gone on the Portugal flight, Fletch. He's with the squad. It's very messy business. What would you like to see happen here, first of all?
What I would like to see is a swift resolution, one way or the other. Whether that's Morgan signs a new contract and agrees to stay for another season or however long it is, and redoes the contract with the clause so that Forest can get a bigger fee when he does eventually leave, or they can come to some kind of agreement with Tottenham that is mutually beneficial and they can move forward. One thing they don't need is this to drag towards the back end of the transfer window. And then when you look round, all the potential replacements are gone, and it's inevitable still that you lose the player, and then you can't replace him properly, and you've got a big hole to fill that you might not even be able to fill in January either. So I think the speed of the decision making here is of paramount importance. I think from a Forest perspective, they've got to get used to this, that big players are going to be wanted each summer by potentially bigger clubs who are playing in the Champions League. So they've got to get used to that, because this is going to happen a lot. So be ready for it. And look, the one thing you would say about Morgan is we don't know what he actually wants to do. And I wouldn't be the kind of person that would try and guess what he's thinking. But what I would say, I've got every faith in his professionalism that while this is ongoing, that he will be the best version of himself. And we've not seen any indication yet to this point that he's not going to do that. And I think that's all that, as a supporter, that we can ask at the moment, is that he just remains professional and does his lot for the club while he's still here, and then let those behind the scenes work out what the conclusion is going to be. But I would just like it to be sooner rather than later, so that the dominoes can start to fall, and whatever decisions need to be taken in the wake of it can be taken in the next week or so, rather than it dragging on too long.
There's conflicting stuff on Twitter, about whether he's actually in Portugal or not. So, but probably the same question still, Temps. What do you want to see happen here?
Look, I think this situation ends with him going to Spurs. Daniel Levy won't pay a penny more than £60 million. However, he learned about that number. He's one of the most brutal negotiators in football, and he'll be entrenched in that position, and certainly won't try to buy his way out of trouble. If he stays at Forest, it's because we make him the best paid player in the history of the club and continue to build a team around him. And that's the outcome that I would like. I think the contribution that Morgan Gibbs-White has made in saving us from relegation and then establishing us in a European position justifies him being the top dog in that dressing room, the captain, the biggest earner, the lad that gets picked week in, week out, irrespective of system or circumstances. I think he probably does want to move. These moves don't get to this position without a green light from the player. But I don't demonize him for that, because of what he's already done for this club in these run of 3 seasons, which none of us will ever forget. It's a fickle business. You're soon forgotten. Ramon Sosa has come and gone with barely a whisper, and we won't mention him 3 hours later. Morgan Gibbs-White will get demonized by a section of the support because of this assumed disloyalty. But I think, sadly, this is the point at which he exits the stage. But the outcome I would celebrate most is him signing a 5-year contract on 200 grand a week plus and continuing to play his football at Forest. I just see it as increasingly unlikely, despite this delay in his departure.
I think sometimes you get a fork in the road or a line in the sand or whatever you want to look at it. Something happens at your club and it makes you face up to what the next challenge is. And I think the point that Temps makes there is really important, and probably something that's been discussed a lot internally at the moment. What does the wage structure look like moving forward? Because as you get higher up the Premier League, your players get better and they start to play for England and they're playing in Europe and other clubs want them. The natural situation that develops off the back of that is that everybody needs to be paid more. And I wonder what they see as the wage ceiling inside the City ground and how they want to spread the wealth around the room, because that ultimately is going to dictate how long you keep your players and what kind of players that you can attract. We've gone back to the Jadon Sancho, the Marcus Rashford. I mean, it's rarefied air, but they're in excess of £300,000 a week. I mean, they're numbers that Forest are never going to get to. But what do Forest see themselves paying? I mean, Spurs don't pay as much as Manchester United, but Spurs have got a level of player, therefore, that they can attract. In this case, it's Morgan Gibbs-White. Prior to that, it was Brennan Johnson. It's players like Dominic Solanke who will leave the situation that they're in where they're earning maybe less than £100,000 a week, and they might go and earn £150,000 a week. That the next step is to the super level where they start to earn the ridiculous cash. But Forest's decision now has to be, and this is something that will develop over time, where do they see their ultimate wage bill being? Because that will tell us a lot about how long they can keep people, who they can sign. And this might be the summer when all of that starts to come into focus based on the situation with Morgan and the situation with Anthony Elanga.
Yeah, I think so. Because we're getting a pretty brutal lesson of where we are on the food chain right now, I think, this summer. But where we end up on the food chain, I think it's dictated more by the wage bill more than the fees we pay. And it's what Forest can get to.
I think that's a good point, Matt, because the fees you pay, it is what it is. So if you've got that money in the club, you can go and buy the player. It's 50 million, 70 million, you might fancy doing it. But if you then had a player into your dressing room was on 250,000 quid a week, and then your Brazilian centre-back, who everybody loves, so, well, I think I'm as important as he is, and then the central midfield player who might be an England player by the time the World Cup comes around, so, well, what about me, because I'm also there too, and then your centre-forward's doing X and your left winger's doing Y. Everybody then goes in, and then you've got this domino effect that everybody's got to be paid, and then the whole thing starts to fall apart. So it's a really difficult balancing act that they've got to put together now. And it's the next stage of the journey, isn't it? And what a great situation to be in. If you would have said to the owner 3 years ago, I tell you what, 3 years' time, you've got to have to decide whether you pay a player 200 grand a week because you're going to be that good. The journey's going to be that good. The fans are going to be selling the place out every week. You're going to be in the Europa League or the Conference League. You just missed out on the Champions League, and now you've got to start paying proper money. Mr. Marinakis would have said, I'll buy into that. I'll take that. We'll do that. So it's just part of the journey, but it's the next step now. And that's going to tell us a lot about what the future looks like, what they can afford to pay on a weekly basis to a player.
Exactly, Fletch. It's a consequence of success. And our breakout season has come a little bit early in the plan. And that can only be a good thing. Because if we'd have finished 10th, we wouldn't have been able to defend these moves for some of our players. The fees wouldn't be quite where they are. And we'd be celebrating the likes of James Mcatee a bit more strongly, I think. We've had an amazing season. It's going to be really, really hard to replicate. And how we navigate these next few weeks is going to be vital. But I do think we're going to make positive moves in the transfer window. But such a seismic part of that is resolving the MGW saga, and can only be a good thing. But he's played some minutes in pre-season, may or may not be in Portugal. But yeah, don't question his attitude or professionalism. Whilst ever he works for our club, he'll play well for our club. I just see it ending with him in a Spurs shirt, sadly.
I do think there's one other thing that's just gone under the radar all summer around the squad, and it plays into wage bill. Obviously, Nico Oleraina and Matt Sells have signed a new contract. Jason here says, anyone worried about Callum Hudson-Odoi's contract? I really am. He played against Monaco, and he played that Elanga role. He was on free kicks. I feel like he's central to our attack, and we haven't really spoken about him, and he still hasn't signed a contract.
Yeah, I'm concerned about that. I am concerned about that. And you've got to look at Callum's background. I mean, Callum Hudson-Odoi came through at Chelsea as one of the most highly touted academy footballers that this country has ever produced. If there was ever going to be a sure thing, it was him. He was rated that highly as an academy.
Still only 24, Fletch, 24 years old.
He's come through a big club, and he's been at a big club, and he's come to Forest to get everything kick-started again. But he's been there and he's tasted it. He knows what it's like. He's played for England. He's played in the Champions League. He's experienced all of this, and he's only 24. He's going to be a player that not only will big clubs be thinking, well, look, the talent's there, and we maybe still haven't seen the best of him, and he's ready to really burst now and become the player that everybody thought he was going to be when he was 16. But also, he might be sat there thinking, you know what, I want a taste of the high life again, because I've had it before. You get that scent in your nostrils and the taste in your mouth. I'm concerned about it. I really am concerned about it. And I think it'd be a real problem for Forest if they go through a summer where they lose Morgan, Anthony and Callum in the space of a few weeks. That's tough. I mean, we're looking at Brentford at the minute and saying they could lose Mbeumo, Wissa and Norgard. I'd make a strong case that the three leaving Forest would be even more impactful than that if the three of them ended up going this summer. So I think the Hudson-Odoi situation is big. And I think if they do keep him, then that sends a really positive message to the fan base, to the dressing room. And it also tells you they're really serious about making sure that they can do their best with their current players to keep this group together. It's big. It is really big.
Yeah, we saw the sales contract come out of nowhere, and I really hope that Callum follows suit and we get an announcement on that soon, because that would be a big statement.
I think the sales one, Matt, is relatively easy. They paid £5 million from Strasbourg. He wouldn't be on a great deal of money. He's got the Golden Glove last season with David Raya. I think he's probably now being given a contract that reflects the season that he's had, and I don't think that's necessarily a dial shifter in the dressing room based on what he would have been on when he came. So I think that is probably a relatively easier one. The Aina one was that caught my eye because Ola Aina at the time, the season he had, there would have been quite a few clubs in the Premier League would happily take him. I think that was quite significant to keep him, and that won't be a cheap contract. Ola's, I wouldn't have thought, but this Hudson-Odoi one, it fascinates me, and the quieter it is, the more concerning it gets.
I know it's weird how we've talked about it a bit, but not enough. Yeah, I think you're right. Right, excuse me. Still quite a few things to get through, so we'll rattle through them in the final part of the show. Over 900 people with us, which is wonderful. Do us a favour and hit like, and then we'll catch you in just under 30 seconds after this word from Global Telemetrics.
Forest Focus viewers, you may have seen what we've actually done over the past year in regards to vehicle theft. You might have those feelings of that it will never happen to me or it won't happen to my car. Did you know that the most stolen car last year was a Ford Fiesta, and Global Telemetrics has noticed a big uptake of thefts in the Nottinghamshire area? Don't be another "it won't happen to me." Drop us an email on how we can protect your vehicle.
That was Gavin from Global Telemetrics, who's a big Leicester fan, so he probably didn't enjoy filming that with the City ground behind him. But do check out the link in the description for that. Give us a word on Danilo, Temps. We haven't discussed him, and he certainly deserves a section for his contributions to the club. What would you say about him now he's gone to Botafogo?
Well, we know what I'm talking about when I say a couple of goals that he scored at the City ground were some of the most enjoyable moments of those campaigns. I think he's 100%er. He's all action. He had that bit of magic. He had a range of passing and an eye for goal that we really needed at times. So unlucky to go down as he did on the first game of last season with a pretty horrific leg break, and fair play to him for coming back in the same season. I don't think that he's left for the lack of what he can offer to the squad. I think it's just a chapter of his career that's come to a close. Wants to go back and play in the upper echelons of Brazilian football, which will really suit him. He leaves us a better player than he arrived, and he leaves the club in a better position than he found it. And you have to make these transition re-signings. Man City couldn't go straight out and find the Erling Haaland equivalent when the money came in. They signed the Robinho and those likes to get him to this point. And Danilo has been an important player in helping Forest navigate a way to talking about the kind of incomings that we're discussing now. Did very, very well for us. Unlucky with injury. Has some brilliant moments, particularly at the City ground. And I think he'll be remembered fondly by everyone that saw him play.
It's another big piece of the jigsaw, Temps, isn't that? Central midfield. I mean, Sangare did very well against Monaco and finished the season well. Elliot Anderson you can build around. There's just that question mark of what we can do to strengthen that still. And Danilo going opens up a space that we probably need to fill, I think, don't we? Yeah,
I think Dominguez came to the fore, didn't he? Back end of last season, he was the kind of unsung hero of that side who did the piano shifting, if you like, when he was surrounded by a fair few piano players. I think Yatesy understudies him really, really well. But we're looking for that dynamic player that's a good yardstick, actually. If they can displace Nicolas Dominguez from the team by doing what he does and adding a little bit more going forward, then you've got a really, really good player on your hands. And on his best days, Danilo could do that. he had all kinds of facets to his game that made him a relatively prevalent pick when he was available. There were some high-profile instances of him coming back into the side rather unexpectedly that were curtailed by injury. And yeah, I think we had a bit of, not an embarrassment of riches, but we certainly had a depth at central midfield last season that made every team selection somewhat more difficult than it was at other positions where there was a standout individual who was going to be front and centre. So I think Elliot Anderson, as things stand, is the only person guaranteed a place in that midfield three. We need to secure Morgan Gibbs-White or the replacement, and the Dominguez space is up for grabs. So yeah, Sangare, he's kind of flirted with being the answer and never quite had the availability to hold down that spot. So I wouldn't be expected to see more incomings that can join that contest.
I thought I'd aim that question at Fletch. Sorry, I think I probably said the wrong name. Fletch, any final thoughts on the team before we move on to a couple of off-field things at the end of the show?
No. Just on Danilo, it's interesting because we spoke earlier in the podcast about not kind of stereotyping players. The one thing I'd say about Danilo, I could never actually quite work out what he was, where he fitted into the jigsaw. He was pretty good at a lot of things, but didn't seem outstanding at any one thing, and he didn't seem to develop any particular facet significantly enough to say, well, that's going to be his place in the team. I think he could pretty much fit in wherever you wanted him, but I'm not sure he necessarily excelled anywhere, which probably tells you why they've taken the decision to move on. So I wish him well. It's a World Cup year. He's back in Brazil. He'll be thinking he might be able to nick into the squad if all things work out. And he's always going to be welcome back to the City Ground because he's such a popular player with the fans. Just on the team, when you think about it, I don't know whether some of us are just a little bit guilty of not really accepting when the good things are staring right in front of you. I've just got this thought in my mind. If they started the season, Forest, and the midfield three was Elliot Anderson, Jacob Ramsey and James Mcatee, is that a problem? Because if I would have said at the start of last season that would be your calibre of midfield, then people are going, great. But I don't know whether we're all expecting just a little bit much. I mean, I know I've come on here and said this felt like a summer where you maybe try and sign one that you didn't expect you get. That to me would be a Jacob Ramsey, because I wouldn't have thought that Forest would get Jacob Ramsey from Aston Villa, England midfielder, etc. So that would be one of those. But if the midfield, starting midfield was that, and then backing them up was Dominguez and Yates and people like that, and maybe one or two others because they go for a bit more depth as well, that wouldn't necessarily unduly worry me. Would it you?
Only because this has been the first window in living memory where at the outset it was more about who we keep than who we sign. That's the only reason.
Yeah, it wouldn't worry me. It would be very attacking. I think
that's fine.
I think we're heading to 4-3-3.
I miss Sangare from that midfield group as well. I mean, there's six players, and they're all flexible. You know, Elliot could play as a 10, Elliot could play as an 8, Elliot can play as a 6, Ramsey can do all. You've got to really, if that was your crew in midfield going into the season, I think you'd be confident that you could deal with any situation. That if injuries came, you'd be okay. You've got players that could go and fit in. There's still Douglas Luiz floating around. Forest is still rumoured to be part of that conversation if he comes back to the Premier League with one or two others. And there's another player that, you know, a very orthodox number 6 that will give you that stability at the back of the midfield where Sangare finished the season. So, you know, you'd never like to see players go, but I think back to the summer when Forest lost Neil Webb, and you think back to the summer when Forest lost Roy Keane. I mean, there is life after these players. You've just got to be in a position to know who to sign and how to respond. And that's what teams like Brighton and Brentford have done so well in the last 2 or 3 seasons and longer in the Premier League. Forest have just got to work out what the talent looks like when the talent departs. And if they get that bit right, then everything will be fine.
I think if we have a team, I think what I want us to play 4-3-3. If we have a team with a front three of Hudson-Odoi, Dan Ndoye, commentator's nightmare, Fletch, and Chris Wood with Igor Jesus as the backup, and then a midfield of Sangare, Anderson. That third piece of the puzzle is so important. I still think, I know we've said this a lot, we need to create more as a team. We dried up creatively massively at the end of last season. Whoever comes in to play that Gibbs-White role, whether or he stays, I think we just need to create more chances. And I think Ndoye is probably more of a goal scorer than Elanga if we get him. So I think we can still head towards an exciting team. We've just got quite a lot of work to do. But hope this week is the week it picks up.
What is interesting as well is that sometimes last season you'd look at Forest and say, could they be a bit more attacking? It's notable to me that the majority of the players that they're being linked with at the minute are attacking players. They're all players that are going to get this team moving forward. It's quite exciting as a fan to think that whoever of this group they managed to get into the club, you're bringing players in that are going to get people off their seats in the City ground, and you're going to see a team that's going to be wanting to attack, because that's what these players do. They're not being linked with players that's going to give them a solid shape and nothing else, are they? They're being linked with players that we're all going to be looking forward to seeing in a red shirt. So I think it's exciting.
I think so. I can see Remo Freud has been debated in the chat. I don't know how we got back to that. That's 2 years ago. Move on.
Do you know what though? You know, in Nuno's team, I think he'd be a better fit than he was before. If he would. Yeah. He would. If you said to Freuler now, go and sit at the back of the midfield and be Remo Freuler, which is what you see him do everywhere else apart from that season at Forest. He's done it everywhere else. Does it for his national team, does it for all of his clubs. The only club he didn't do it for was Forest. But I think if you asked him to do it now, in Nuno's system, he looked fantastic at it.
Yeah, we've still got, I think, well, we're going back to Sangare. He can do it, I think, anyway. Right, I think that was lots of team chat. There's a few off-the-field things I wanted to touch on. I got it in my head, just for people who saw that Newcastle had hired Jack Ross. That meant they weren't going to hire Ross Wilson, but that was for a different job. So Ross Wilson might still be in the pipeline to leave. There's a position at Newcastle vacant. So I was just going to mention that. The other thing I want to discuss quickly, and we always go back to temps on this, is ticket prices. Quite a few people got in touch saying, can you discuss the ticket prices for the Brentford game? It's a Category A game, despite it being Brentford, but I suppose that's because it's the first game of the season. Tickets for adults start at 50 quid and peak at 70 quid. I see Villa are charging 77 for the whole end. Discount tickets, 40 to 55 for seniors. It's on screen if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening, 14 to 17 is 22 to 35. Kids start at 18 to 30. It makes me worry what the European prices are going to be if we're in the Europa League especially. But temps, I suppose there's two ways to looking at it. I really think we're in danger of pricing out a generation of younger people, and we're going to end up with middle-aged men in their 40s who don't make as much noise, which is a worry to me.
Like me,
I'm
you
one
mean?
of them.
Like me,
well,
yeah.
And me, yeah. Like me, definitely.
40 temps.
But I suppose maybe your argument, temps, that I always defer back to on this, as I said, is it's supply and demand. What's your view on ticket prices? Because a lot of people aren't happy with it and want us to talk about it, and I can see why as well.
Sadly, the reality of modern football, and this is a business that loses £1 million a week, as well as a football club that we all love and follow. I certainly feel good about having a season ticket that I pay around £500 for, and the relative value of that. When I look at Mansfield Town charging £30 for a ticket, when I look at Notts County charging £375 for a season ticket, there is still value to be had for watching your favourite team play at this level 19 times a year. Did I ever foresee a time when Forest could command £70 a ticket, and some tickets were available on secondary sites for even more? Of course not. But we've come up the rails so quickly that the growth in the price has tried to keep pace with improving times on the pitch, and we certainly wouldn't be anywhere near these numbers if we were still operating in the Championship. PSR means that you have to drive income from commercial partnerships, from broadcast, and from match day income to spend on transfers and wages. And there's pretty much a straight line with some exceptions between the clubs that successfully exploit that and those that don't. Forest have taken huge strides on the broadcast income. They've taken huge strides on the commercial income, and their match day income has been hampered by historic Championship pricing and a stadium that in certain corners is falling to bits. We have to address that. And sadly, as fans, we have to accept that the price of watching Premier League football is only going to rise. hate the fact that this means that certain people and certain groups will be excluded from watching Forest, because it's a club that's always made it very, very accessible. Some of my early memories were with mates from school, kids for £1 in the A block and trying to get amongst it. And yeah, those days are seemingly behind us now, but there'll be no lack of takers. And come the Brentford game, you'll see a sold out City ground absolutely rocking. I'm just glad that Forest have been very sensible in the manner in which they've driven the rises in season tickets, which feel fair, at least from my perspective as a I think a Cat 4 season ticket holder. And yeah, it was only 4 years ago that you could ring up and get a season ticket. That's not the case now. 70 feels too expensive off the bat, but if people want an explanation as to why, that's what it is. Leads to how much you can spend on the football pitch. I
absolutely hate the fact that fans get priced out of football matches, and this is not a Forest thing. This is a football wide thing, and in the Premier League, it's worse than anywhere. And at a time when there's more money in the game than there's ever been, we're asking people to pay more and more every week, and it's not just Forest. It's everybody. It's Premier League wide, pretty much. You could have a look at the ticket prices, make a comparison to a couple of years ago, and you might get a few exceptions where there are bargains to be had or situations are in place. But in general, I think football needs to take a look at what it's expecting people to pay. And I think, the facilities have to match the price and all this kind of thing. The entertainment has to match the price. And it worries me, really. And I know everything you say, Temps, because you've got the experience of this, from what you do. And I get it. I understand it. And I can see the reason for it. But it doesn't take away from the fact that I absolutely hate it, that people have grown up and they're passionate about supporting their team and wanting to take the kids. Granddad wants to take the grandkids. Dad wants to take the kids. It wants to be a family day out. But if you're a family now and you want to go and watch a game, you're into the hundreds of pounds to make it happen. And people, they just can't afford to do it. And I absolutely hate it, because this should be a sport for everyone. And everybody should be able to access it. And it should be available to the masses. And a lot of people do get priced out. I'm not putting this on Forest. It's football in general. And I think there needs to be some global look at what we expect football supporters to do and what we expect them to give up to be able to follow their passion, because they don't ask for this. They just get given this. And this is a lot of people in offices that, well, we're going to do this and they'll pay for it. And, in reality, I don't necessarily like it. It leaves a bad taste. And I feel really sorry for the people who won't be able to go. I think that's terrible. But far from this just being a Forest problem, this is a football problem. And I think it needs to be looked at on a global scale to try and get things under control, because you wonder where it's going to go, don't you? You wonder what's going to be next. I mean, soon it's going to be £100 a game. I mean, they're not going to come down, are they? I mean, things like this never do. They always continue to rise. They don't really come down. And then, what happens, heaven forbid, if the team's not a Premier League club and you're back in the Championship and they don't want to sell out every week and the people don't want to go back because it leaves a bad taste in the mouth because they couldn't afford it when they were paying top dollar in the Premier League. There's a lot of things, I think, in football where people sometimes just need to take a deep breath and take a step back and have a look at it and say, what can we do here? There must be something that we can do to make this a fairer system.
I'll come back to Temps in 1 minute for a final word on it. Just before I do, a bit of clarity on Gibbs-White from John Percy, who said he's not travelled with the squad to Portugal today. Private and personal matter unrelated to football. He's expected to join up later in the week. So just to reference that. Finishing up on ticket prices, this caught my eye, and it relates to what Fletch was saying. Mansfield Town's matchday ticket prices, and this isn't a particularly this isn't leafy London suburbs or anything. This is Mansfield, where they're charging £30 for adult tickets. This is match day. Seniors 26, kids start under 14 start at £15. That's a lot of money. I worry we'll end up with dynamic pricing like that Oasis gig or where. No, it wasn't Oasis. Whoever it was, and we'll be paying God knows what.
It was Oasis, but I don't think the clamour for tickets to Field Mill is ever going to match the
no. But clamour for Premier League tickets, yeah. I know. I'll just, before I let Temps finish up on this as well, I'll put this point up from Dino. He wanted to, can Temps explain the difference between Premier League and Bundesliga, where tickets are much lower? I suppose you're going to tell me it's market-driven forces, Temps, or something like that. But final word on ticket prices, so you're probably going to get some hammer for what you say.
Well, there's only 3 teams in the Bundesliga that spend more than £50 million a year on wages in Red Bull, Dortmund and Bayern. The ownership model is very different in Germany with the rules over fan ownership, and it's an unbelievable day out. So yeah, I would back what the commenter says. There are ways of experiencing football as a tourist in Eastern Europe, anywhere in Germany, when you can have an altogether different experience, and it's still extremely affordable. Ultimately, the Premier League is the world league. Salaries have spiraled out of control to the point where they were more than 100% of turnover in some clubs at some points, and PSR is coming partly to battle that. But I echo everything that Fletch said. Not a Forest problem, it's a football problem. But the model and the salary expectation in Germany is markedly different, where a lot of these clubs are profitable too.
Is this for a game, Ian? I'll put this point up. To watch ice hockey, to watch NHL, $190. Is that season ticket or game? That can't be for a game, surely. That'd be insane. No, it's got to be. It's got to be. I don't know. Yeah. I think you're right. Player wages are nuts. Like, you could earn. This isn't going to change either, but a Premier League player could earn in a week what a well-off person earns in a year still. But that's the direction of football, and it's a bit miserable. Let's finish off just one other point, and this is a finance point as well. There was a report that Forest had taken out a loan with Apollo Management have lent Forest 80 million quid in what it calls expensive debt with an interest rate of 8.75%, 55 million to refinance an existing debt, and the rest for working capital. Other clubs to have done this include Everton, Chelsea, both Milan clubs, and our friends at Lyon, who have borrowed more than $400 million, some of it at 19%. Inter and AC Milan both fell foul of this and got into financial trouble. So I'm not an expert on this at all. So I messaged Kieran Maguire to say, is this an alarming rate? Should we be worried about it? And I've got a voicemail note back from him. It's 40 seconds long. So the three of us will stare slightly weirdly into the screen while everyone listens along to this. Here we go.
Interest rate isn't excessive in today's market. If we take a look at other clubs, I think the likes of West Brom, Southampton have borrowed at double-digit rates. I've seen clubs paying 13, 14%, especially when money's been advanced on specific issues such as future transfer fees or Premier League future broadcast revenues, stroke parachute payments. So it's not excessive. It reflects the perception of risk as far as the lender is concerned. So I don't see it as being a huge issue.
What's it for?
55%, I think. 55 million is to service an existing borrowing, I think. Oh yeah, refinance.
So they owe 55 million, so they borrowed 80 to pay some of the 55. I mean, that to me, that you're not actually clearing anything, are you?
I think it says there's put in the piece in the Financial Times says it refinances an existing debt which we took out with a different loaning company that also loaned to Everton, and the rest is working capital. And I think part of it is probably to pay into the ground redevelopment. I think as well it means Evangelos Marinakis is not bankrolling everything. I'm worried I'm getting into territory I don't understand here, right. But I think that's what it is.
It's difficult to comment until you know what it's for. I mean, it looks nice on a piece of paper, and Kieran's explained it really well there. But unless you know what the reason is behind it and what they're going to use it for, and it's difficult to say whether you think it's a good thing or a bad thing. It might just be a natural business practice that a lot of clubs might do to move money around in various different ways. I don't know.
A lot of clubs do it. Temps, any insight?
Yeah, in the sporting world, there's not traditional lenders won't get involved when they can see a business on paper loses a lot of money every single week and doesn't look like a prime candidate for a mortgage, which is what this effectively is. There are often timing issues with tranches of money promised at particular times, and the need to have capital to get between those quarterly drop-offs, for example, when you're running at a loss before a big dollop lands from your governing body or your broadcaster. I think several specialist lenders have cottoned onto this, Macquarie probably being the highest profile investment bank in Australia, who will now quite happily lend sports clubs money based against future guarantees, be that broadcast income or season ticket income, the two that are typically lent against. Now, because of the inherent risk, those rates are generally considerably higher than we would pay for mortgage finance. I can see Fletch thinking, what's a mortgage? or a traditional lender would lend to a sporting institution. So no,
Which is actually thinking, when can he get out of his mortgage? That's how it's just brought the reality that we have to work forever.
So yeah, I wouldn't be alarmed by it, and I'd certainly trust Mr. Maguire is a far more qualified expert than I am, but we have to de-link. Like, we hear these numbers in a personal finance sense. It's a lot of money for Forest. That might be one year's worth of broadcast income. So that cash flow and that ability for our owner to be able to manage his resources across multiple businesses means that this isn't uncommon. And the only shame of it is this is cash being lost from the game, paying interest to opportunistic institutions that see a chance to charge 10, 12, 15% on debt.
And you would presume, therefore, for any Forest fans who might be concerned about it, based on the point that Matt made about the Milan clubs getting into difficulty with it and it not being an ideal situation, that I presume would only occur if you don't follow then the structure of how you manage it properly. If you don't manage it properly, you can get yourself in a mess. But if you do and you're sensible, then it wouldn't be an issue.
Yeah, precisely. I think there's not many institutions out there, there's not many sports clubs out there that carry enough cash on their balance sheets to bankroll these peaks and troughs. And that may be linked to capital projects, such as buying a stand, or linked to signing a player. Let's say, for instance, Spurs want 20 million up front for Son. You can't afford it. You either pay 25 million to them in installments, or you find a way for a finance house of financing that transfer and paying back a third party and having the club benefit at the outset. And Forest will be the beneficiaries of that in the other direction. If Ilanga was £60 million up front, despite the wealth behind the scenes, Newcastle may have used a finance house to fund that. I doubt it in the case of the Saudi PIF, but it's not uncommon. Cash flow management at a club is very, very keenly sought. And you'd be unwise to keep, if you had a huge cash balance, to keep it in a traditional bank, earning traditional interest when there's other means of getting money and putting it to use.
It's not a new thing either, is it? If you think back to when Forest signed David Johnson all those years ago, when Nigel Doughty was the owner, they financed that through a company called Brentford at the time, who were doing it back then. So a lot of the Leeds United transfers at that time, when they bought a lot of people and got into the Champions League and did really well, that was a Brentford situation. So it's been happening for a period of time. Did I also, just kind of going back to Morgan Gibbs-White, did I also see that if you've got a situation with a release clause and a team comes in and matches the release clause, then by matching that release, you have to pay that transfer in one
Depends
payment.
on the clause itself, the terms of the clause, doesn't it? I think, Temps.
Yeah, it depends on the terms of the clause. But again, that there's a situation where Spurs might use a finance house to give Forest 60 million and to repay 65 over 24 months, or along those injections from the broadcasters.
Yeah. Good discussion anyway. Glad to get Kieran's insight. It sounds like it's nothing to panic about. Certainly, that was the main thing I wanted, because it was out of my wheelhouse. I've got a few bits of any other business, but anything you want to add before we go, Temps?
Well, just those seeking the ultimate value in Nottinghamshire sporting tickets, come to Trent Bridge. We've got a food festival on the 24th of August. Notts v Surrey, DJ, music, 18 food stores, £6 for adults, £3 for kids. There's your bargain.
Perfect.
Bargain indeed. Fletch, anything for you before we go?
Yes, there's that little window that's just over Temp's right shoulder, and I've just seen someone in a white coat just apply rubber gloves and just tap on it very gently. So
it's time.
I'll assume the position.
Right. Just from me before we go, if you've got any charity stuff you want to plug, then do get in touch. A listener, George Greenhill, got in touch. He is doing 10k a day to raise money for Mind. He's hoping to raise $5,000. If you're watching on YouTube, there's a QR code on screen that you can scan. Otherwise, I'll pop a link in the description afterwards. But like I say, if you've got any things charity-wise you want to do, give me a shout. We're back tomorrow, 7 p.m. with Emily. We'll do a fan phone-in, so I'll put a link out for that later, and we'll hear from David Jackson on Wednesday. And then the last thing, yesterday, I was asked to give a shout-out to Tipperary for the Irish stick fighting thing, hurling, and they won, and lots of people got in touch to say...
Long way to there, Matt. It's a long way. It's a long way.
Apparently they don't like that song. I don't know anything. Again, out of my wheelhouse. And apologies to any 40-year-old men who make noise at the City Ground. I think I offended a few by saying that the City Ground will be full of us.
We know where you live, Davis.
Yeah, I know. Well, God, yeah. Hopefully not. Right, I think we shall leave it there. We've had over 900 people with us throughout, which is really good. So if you haven't hit like, do us a favour, do that before we go. Do subscribe. Do consider membership or Patreon, or just give us a lovely 5-star review on Apple or Spotify, and buy your live show tickets as well. That'd be great. Michael Temple, thank you very much.
Cheers, fellas. See you soon.
Fletch, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good to talk to you both. Good luck, Tem.
Lots of fun today. Really enjoyed that. Thanks for your company, everyone. If we don't see you tomorrow, we shall see you soon.